Hello and welcome to another week of learning your chess openings. This week we are going after the Vienna Gambit. So last week we went over the Scandinavian defense. This week we're going over the Vienna Gambit, and next week we'll be going over the Vienna game when black doesn't give you the knight to f6 move that you need to perform the gambit. So let's start off with what the gambit even is. For white, you want to start off with the pawn to e4. Black will have to come back with the pawn to e5. We then go knight to c3. It's a lot different than how I usually want to go with g3 to attack that pawn, but this time we're taking a more defensive structure and defending this pawn. Black, then they'll get aggressive and go for this e4 pawn here. We'll follow up directly with the f4 pawn. Now, this is the gambit in a nutshell. This is how you start off. If you don't get to this, you can't get the gambit. We need to be in this structure exactly. So what the gambit accepted looks like is black will take the f4 pawn. We then follow up with the e5 pawn moving forward, attacking the knight. Now, there is nowhere for this knight to go. Can't go here, can't go here, because this queen will take this. You can't go here, because the knight takes this, as well as here, because the knight takes that. That leaves the only logical place for the knight to go back to g8, losing a developmental move there, and letting us really attack from here. So the next thing is we want to stop this pawn advancing, so we go knight to g3 while also protecting this pawn up here. Black will try to then dislodge this pawn from moving up and blocking development by moving to d6. White quickly just moves up to d4, defending this pawn. So if he does take, we are right back on it. He'll take, and what we do here, instead of taking right back on it like he thought we were going to do, we're going to move the queen right here to d2. This pins the pawn to the king because it can no longer take this piece and really stops the development of black. So one thing black will try to do is drop this bishop right here to b4, trying to pin this knight to the king. We just do the queen to e5. The king they'll probably move the queen there. And instead of just doing the trade right away, we'll do a bishop to c4. And you can see that we have about a piece advantage here. But the biggest advantage we have is this whole center of the board is developed by us, and we have a strong advantage going into it. So that is the Vienna Gambit accepted. Now, what if they decline the Gambit? Well, there's a couple different options that we have here, and we'll look over them and the advantages that we have for both. So we go right into the knight to c3 move here. They'll go the f4. We get the gambit set up. What they'll do next, black usually likes to do the pawn to d6, guarding the e5 pawn. What we want to do is not take right here on the f4 immediately. We want to develop the knight to f3. They'll take the pawn, which is fine. We push our other pawn up to d4, taking control of the center of the board. This pawn is rendered useless. Best move that the computer says is for the knight to h5, protecting the f4 pawn from this bishop attack right here. And from there, we have about a piece advantage here, and we control the center of the board. We have all this open. The bishops have avenues to go. But worst of all is black still hasn't really gotten his pawns out. The really only thing that you can do is drop this bishop out here, trying to get something going. You might be able to get a knight out, but we control the center of the board so much better than black. So we have the advantage there. The other variation of the gambit decline we'll be looking at is when the black player will move their bishop to c6 to defend the e5 pawn instead of moving the pawn up to f6. So let's go up. We go right into the gambit, and instead of taking the pawn, they decline and go bishop to b6. Right away, we can see that there is an advantage right here for the computer. They consider this move a blunder, and these are the best moves that the computer has coming for us. We take, bishop will take. We then push up to d4 to attack this bishop. The bishop won't take that because the queen will take. The knight will move here instead. We take with the pawn. The knight will take the other knight here on c3. And it's looking like things aren't going well for us, but we're still up 3.5 points. So the first thing we want to do is move that queen up to d4, essentially trapping this knight. No matter where it goes, it's going to be dying. They'll then develop this pawn to d6 move. We will take the knight, and we're guarding this pawn. So if he does take, we take it back, and we have the check in the bag. This puts us up at about 3 points, and we can see here that there is lots of room for development for white, whereas black still has to develop a lot of the pawns in order to get back in this game. So the last gambit decline that we're going to be looking at is the worst one for black to take, and that's moving the knight to c6. So we get into the gambit stage. and he moves his knight to c6 here. This is bad because we'll just break it down. So the knight will take the e5 pawn. The knight will then take that pawn. We then push up to d4, threatening the knight. He will move back to g6 because there's really nowhere to go. It's like the other knight. Death and despair is the only thing going for it. The next thing we'll want to do is push the knight up. This will send this knight back to g8 because it has nowhere safe to go. We're now controlling the center of the board pretty heavily. We'll then push the knight up to f3, continuing to control the center. They'll move this pawn up to e5, and then this is where we get a little bit counterintuitive if we want to win this game. We'll send this bishop right here to f4, let him take the pawn. We will then castle, letting him take the pawn again. And you can see here that this is a huge advantage for us. We then kick the knight over there to g5, creating this attack line right here. He then takes our knight, thinking that this is a good move for him, and it's already spelled doom. We have mate in 5. We go bishop to f7. King has no choice but to move to e7. We move the rook to e1, hitting this king. Now there's a couple different ways that we can go about mating him. There's 3 primary ways that there's nothing that black can do to get out of this. The first is if black decides he wants to stop this check by moving the bishop to e6, in which case we just move the rook here, automatic checkmate. Easiest one to do. Now let's say that he does king to f6 instead, trying to attack this bishop knight combination. We will drop the queen to f3. The knight will then go to f4 to trying to stop this. We then take the knight, and bishop then will go to f5 trying to stop that. And instead of taking, we just move the queen over here to e5, and that's mate. No way to stop it. And the last checkmate that we can be looking at is if they move the knight over here to f5 or e5. We'll then take it with the rook. Taking it with the rook, king will pop over here thinking he's going to be at least able to get out of this, taking one of them. Queen will now go to f3. Queen will take the rook thinking he has a free piece, but by then it's too late because queen to f4 is checkmate. Game over. So that was the Vienna Gambit. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. I come out with a new chess opening every week to help you improve your chess game and increase your ELO ranking for a new beginner just like myself. So tune in next week. Next week we're going to be going over the Vienna game, not necessarily if they do the gambit. So if they move the knight to c6 instead of to f6, we have a Vienna game. So next week we're going to be looking over that and seeing what we can do to dominate the game from there. We'll see you then.